Konbanwa, Pakusetachi. I'm Puppy-Sensei. I am your puppy girl Japanese teacher VTuber of Irium US. I make Japanese language content to help you level up your abilities. For today's grammar point, we're talking about Ageku. This is a grammar form that implies that something ended up a certain way. It's talking about the end result of some specific action or activity. Let's take a look at our grammar card. So here's Ageku. We'll see it following a verb in the ta form or after a noun if it can be connected with the particle no. And if it's connected using the particle no, then that tells us immediately that Ageku itself must also be a noun, right? Because the no particle is used to connect nouns. Remember, no can be thought of as a noun modifying particle. Its most common use is as the Japanese equivalent of apostrophe s in English. Just for clarity, ageku can also function as an adverb, but adverbs in Japanese are also fairly noun-like anyway. In either case, though, whether ageku appears after a past tense verb or after a noun, it still implies that something ended up a certain way. So after a verb, it would imply that after that verb was performed, things ended up in some specific particular way. Or after a noun, it would imply that after a specific event identified by that noun, likewise, things eventually ended up in some specific way. Now, as we've seen rather a lot lately, ageku has an associated kanji compound. So let's make sure that we really understand what ageku looks like when it's written as kanji and not as kana. So here we see it, ageku. These are the kanji that are associated with ageku. And immediately, when I see that second kanji here, the kanji that would be pronounced as ku on its own, I'm thinking about words and phrases. You see this same ku in kanji compounds like monku, meaning complaint, zekku, which is kind of like cat got your tongue, or being rendered speechless, being at a loss for words, without words. Ne? And we also see it in kanyoku, which is one of several different words for a type of idiom in Japanese. Kanyoku specifically implies a phrase used to express a figurative meaning. So it would be pretty reasonable for us to expect that ageku, which uses this ku kanji, would somehow infer some kind of specific word, or in some way be related to words, because we would think that that would be coming through the ku kanji. But if you thought that, you would actually be wrong. Even though usually the ku kanji means word, it's also a counter in Japanese. I actually have a video that I'm working on right now that should come out in early November, where I'll be digging deep into the many Japanese counter words. And ku is a counter word for lines in haiku. In fact, this ku is also the ku in haiku. So actually, ageku doesn't have anything to do with the use of ku for word at all. Ageku is originally a word that used to mean the final line in a renga poem. Renga means something like linked verse, and this is a category of poetry that haiku would belong to. Renga poetry is a type of poetry where one player opens a poem by writing the first part, for example, the first two lines of a haiku, and then they would pass play to the next player who must then complete their poem. And that's why I tend to argue that haiku was actually a drinking game. You would sort of sit around in a circle and each of you would start a poem and then the next person would finish the other person's poem, just like this, right? And there were some kind of specific rules that you had to follow, and if you fail the rules, then you would have to drink. Anyway, ageku actually started out not as a grammatical unit, but rather as a poetic term for how things ended up at the end of the poem. It would be the line that comes at the end, It ends the poem, and this is how things ended up being. And slowly over time, Ageku just kind of became a new term that meant how things ended up not just in poetry, but in any number of different circumstances. All right, that was a huge aside, but I still think it's very, very interesting. Anyway, let's take a look at some example sentences using Ageku. All right, this example sentence is Moru ni 8時間も並んだAgeku、実は新しい iPhone はあまり好きじゃなかったですね。This feels too real. After waiting in line at the mall for 8 hours, I ended up not really liking the new iPhone. モールに8時間も並んだAgeku、実は新しい iPhone はあまり好きじゃなかった。ね。What's important to understand about Ageku, and this is something that we do see sometimes in Japanese. Well, okay, look at the Japanese sentence and look again at the English translation that I've given. In our English translation, we have after waiting in line at the mall for 8 hours. In the end, I actually don't like the new iPhone very much. Both the word after and the phrase in the end are both alive in this translation, but our Japanese sentence does not have two different words or phrases that convey both after this happened and also in the end something wound up being like the case that I didn't like the new iPhone. And that's because in a sentence that uses Ageku, we're going to get the idea both that this is after some event and also that in the end something ended up in some way. The first part of the sentence, the part that precedes Ageku, is going to end up kind of telling the events that sets things up, and those things will have led to some outcome, and that outcome is usually explained in the second half of the sentence where we get the result. That shouldn't really throw us off. It happens sometimes that in one language, a word or phrase can just have a meaning that is not easily conveyed in a single word or phrase of another language. What's significant is that Ageku, in translation, is very interesting because it's taking up spots in both the first and second clauses of our English translation, which to me is very, very cool, right? We see that Ageku is kind of creating this after doing the thing, and also in the end, the result was this. And there's not a really great way to kind of render that in English, except from literally the way that I've done it here. After doing this thing, in the end, this is the result. And both of those meanings are kind of subsumed under Ageku. I think that's neat. As I said previously, Ageku can sometimes be thought of as an adverb, and to that end, you will sometimes see a sentence like this one. モールに8時間も並んだAgekuに、実は新しい iPhone はあまり好きじゃなかった。ね。Meaning is exactly the same. As you can see, the meaning is not changing with the inclusion of ni, which really kind of coerces the adverb use of Ageku. So here, yes, Ageku is in fact an adverb, but what changed? Not very much, right? The idea of Ageku being an adverb really just kind of expresses the fact that it's coming after the verb, it's coming after a thing that got done, right? And in both cases, after a verb or after a noun, Ageku really is doing pretty much the exact same thing. It's not all that much different. So whether we have a sentence clause ending in Ageku or a sentence clause ending in Ageku ni, it's essentially the same thing. Let's take a look at another example sentence. This sentence is 口論の挙句アパートで殺害してしまう事件を起こした。ね。After an argument, there ended up being a murder in the apartment. I wanted to provide a sentence that showed the example of ageku being used following a noun, and when I came across this sentence, I immediately got Halloween vibes, and I really wanted to use this sentence because murder, Halloween, slasher movies. Anyway, let's go piece by piece here. So there was an argument, koron ですね. And ageku, as I explained before, it means both that argument happened, so we're in a state of after the argument, and that makes sense, right? We are after the argument, but also the ageku is pointing us to some end result. So we know we're post-argument and what happened in that argument. Well, in the end, we know that the result occurred, and it occurred in an apartment, apato de. We know that the result was a murder, satsugai, and we know that the murder is in the shitte shimau form. Shitte shimau. So, satsugai shitte shimau kind of implies that the murder probably occurred somewhat by accident, right? They argued, there was maybe a fight, and then, it was maybe a crime of passion, however you want to think about it. The murder wasn't exactly premeditated. You weren't planning on doing a murder. You just had an argument and then murder. Yeah. Okay. So that sentence then ends with jiken o okoshita. ですね。jiken o okoshita. That means that such an event occurred. An event like this occurred. Yeah. And so the back half of the sentence, satsugai shite shimau jiken o okoshita, means the incident of a murder occurred. The event of a murder happened. And the whole sentence together, as I said before, it means after an argument, there ended up being a murder, specifically a murder that was not necessarily intended, wasn't premeditated exactly. Yeah. So that's basically ageku, right? We looked at an example that followed a verb. We looked at an example that followed a noun. Basically, the idea that we're getting is something happened, and that led to an end result. And ageku is kind of conveying both of these things. After event, end result was this, right? Finally, this is how it all worked out. As always, if you have other questions about ageku, or really any other grammar form or anything that I can teach you about Japanese or linguistics, or even just about me, please feel free to reach out at any time. As you may know, I have a new series that I'm doing called Office Hours with Puppy-Sensei, and in that series I will be fielding your questions, so anything that you want to know, you ask, and maybe it'll be featured in a new episode of Office Hours with Puppy-Sensei. In the end, I hope I did a pretty okay job explaining ageku, but for now, we should definitely see what we're going to cover next time, so let's turn to our Wheel of Grammar. Alright, so looking at our Wheel of Grammar, let's take a look and see what we have coming, and it looks like it's gonna be no ga suki ですね。no ga suki. No ga suki is a grammar form that means to like doing something. So next week we will explore things that we love doing, just like I love teaching. And I love teaching all of you. It's so very, very fun for me. I hope you enjoy it as much as I do, and I really look forward to seeing you next week. So, until then, また来週!